The Abbotsford Convent is one of the oldest and largest remaining religious structures in the Southern Hemisphere. It is also claimed to be one of the most haunted places in Australia. What most people don't know is why. 4 kilometres from the Melbourne CBD, the convent is built on traditional land of the Wurundjeri people and is a meeting place for the Central Victorian tribes known as the Kulin Nation. These buildings imprisoned thousands of females for over a century until 1975. It began with 4 Irish Catholic nuns belonging to the Order of the Good Shepherd travelling to Australia to open the convent in 1863. Commissioned by the Victorian government to remove unsightly and immoral sex workers from the community during the Gold Rush era, the nuns offered them placement at the convent. By 1900, however, women and girls as young as 3 and perceived as morally corrupt were forced into the convent as inmates. Contrary to popular belief, only 4% of inmates were orphans. Other female wards of the state were sent there to live as shamed penitents when given birth to by an unwed mother. Many girls were forced or tricked into going there by the courts, parents, teachers, religious clergy, and neighbors concerned about their morals. Abductions of unsuspecting women by their families also occurred, in league with the convent nuns. Women and girls were admitted to the convent for a multitude of sins, including giving birth out of wedlock, being an illegitimate child, being suspected of having premarital intercourse and were given internal examinations to check, being the subject of family incest or sexual assault, as it was believed to be their fault, being too pretty and fearing they might get pregnant, being too ugly and therefore unmarriageable, given up by the poverty-stricken parents unable to feed them and never allowed to see them again unless offering the convent money, being from a single parent family, having a neurodiverse developmental issues, being disruptive, strong-willed or questionable moral character. Those taken into the convent before the 1960s were given new names. Sometimes they were only given a number and uniforms to wear daily. Inmates were forbidden to discuss their life before entering the convent. In fact, they weren't allowed to speak at all. There was a rule of silence at all times, except for 1 hour at dinner time, under the watchful eye of the nuns. Friendships were against the rules. Physical affection, hugs, hand-holding, or comforting of any kind was forbidden. Birthdays were not acknowledged or celebrated. Inmates were physically beaten or tortured publicly, either by nuns or by crows, who were older girls chosen to be in charge. Things like bedwetting, talking, and having eczema rashes were considered signs of the devil, and daily beltings or standing in place for hours with a urine-soaked bedsheet over your head was the punishment. Just like those in Ireland, the Good Shepherd sisters operated a Magdalene asylum at the Abbotsford Convent. This building, known as Sacred Heart, was behind locked gates and closed off from other sections of the convent. It is in here that these fallen women and girls were kept. The ground floor of the Sacred Heart contained the infamous Magdalene laundry. Upstairs was a huge dormitory with open bathrooms that took up the entire first floor and could accommodate up to 400 women. The second floor was the granary, where inmates were sent to work on sewing and mending laundry. In Sacred Heart, instead of attending school, girls of all ages were forced to work 6 days a week in the huge, often dangerous commercial laundry. The work was unpaid, yet created massive incomes for the convent, many times that of the inmates' living expenses. The living and working conditions were against many laws in Victoria, but the convent was a law unto itself, believed to be doing good work, with little interference from the government. Once there, many were trapped inside the convent for years, as Melbourne freely bustled about its daily life outside. Many died at the convent each year from accidents, exhaustion, and illness not medically treated. Most deaths until the 1950s went unreported to the Victorian coroner, so accurate records and gravesite locations remain unknown. For over a century, desperate, broken, and confused women and girls tried to escape the convent, sometimes in groups, planning carefully for months. The walls were over 2 stories high and made of brick cement and glass shards that would cut deep into the flesh. Girls had to scale windows and spires before even reaching these walls. Some died when falling during these escapes. Others broke limbs or their back, and when discovered in a mangled wreck on the other side, were patched up and sent to the Kew Asylum for being so rebellious, never to be seen again. Those making it out of the convent grounds were later drowned trying to swim across the Yarra River, as it was only access to freedom. A lucky few safely swam across the river, but were then caught by nuns or police waiting at the other side. They were brought back to the convent and given internal examinations in case they had been sexually active during their escape. They then had their heads shaved with scissors and were forced into cupboards for days as punishment, often without food. Many of these stories have been collected for the public record from thousands of victims called the Forgotten Australians, when they responded to the 2004 Federal Senate inquiry into child abuse in institutional care. And even though today the Abbotsford Convent has been turned into a thriving art space, it is vital that we acknowledge the historical suffering of the people who were imprisoned here for more than a century because of our society's rules for the female gender.